Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. I'm Hilary Robertson, and for this episode, I'm joined by Simeon Davis. Simeon's going to be talking to me about the Simeon Davis Group's upcoming album of Narratives and Nocturnes. What you're listening to now is Eden, the first single from the album. It's a completely through-composed piece, combining jazz, soul, and subtle elements of Simeon's own background. Eden uses four main themes: the voice of God, Adam's theme, Eve's theme, and the serpent's theme. And I hope you enjoy listening to my conversation with Simeon Davis. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to Harmonious World. It's a great pleasure to have you because you've pushed a couple of my guests my way, and now it's exciting to actually talk to you about your musical projects.
Indeed, I'm definitely excited to be here.
Great. So tell me about the album. For a start, when is the album due out? Because obviously we've heard Eden, but when will the album be out itself?
So the full album's coming out on June 24th is the scheduled date. And so I guess the album as a whole is entitled Of Narratives and Nocturnes, and the title comes from sort of my writing approach as well as some of the stuff that's on the album. So a lot of the elements, or if not all of the elements in the album, are going to be through composed pieces inspired by, extra musical sources. So hence the Of Narratives part. And the latter half of the album is also a lot of darker colors and a lot of darker elements in incorporating that. So that's the Of Nocturnes part. It also kind of just rolls off the tongue. So that's part of the naming process.
Right. Yeah. It's always interesting to talk to people about how they name their tunes and how they name their albums, because that's usually way down the line.
Right.
But sometimes it's not actually. So it's interesting that sometimes the concept, the idea behind the album comes first, and it's always fascinating to find out.
Yeah, I'd say in my part, for the most part, even talking to my musical colleagues and such, I feel like I'm definitely an outlier in that regard, because I may have an initial concept, like say a chord progression or something, and then I won't be able to move forwards with it until I have a name. I have to have something that inspires it, something that pushes it forward, something that I can be like, whenever I get a writing block, I can pull on whatever my extra musical source is. That way I can push it forwards. And so that was the case for practically every single piece on this album, the exception being Requiem for Charles and Seven Come Wednesday. Requiem for Charles was written for a friend of mine, Charles Ling, who when we were 20, he was shot and killed. And so that piece, I didn't necessarily need a concept. I found out about it right before I went to a gig, and I was like, well, I've committed to this gig. I got to go play it. And then I came home and I set up a voice recorder, and I just didn't think, and I just played and played and played and played. And in there somewhere during that grieving process, because I think that's truly what it was, there was a unified melody that kept coming back over and over again. And it's like that one, I didn't have to think about. That was just an outpouring of emotion. And then Seven Come Wednesday was a piece that I wrote in like 6 hours. I had a deadline, and I just said I'm going to lock myself in a practice room and I'm not going to leave until I have something. And it ended up falling very heavily on a lot of my musical roots, and so that's going to sound substantially more South African than a lot of the other pieces that I've written on the album. But that one had the title afterwards because I didn't really have time to think about it.
Right. So you alluded to your South African heritage. How did you end up in America?
It's a great question. I wondered the same thing sometimes. So technically and legally speaking, I was and am born American. I was born in Virginia, but my family moved to South Africa when I was like a year and a half. And so we lived there from 1999, and then I moved out in 2016. They're still there, actually. But I found out about the University of North Texas when I was in high school. And I found out about it, weirdly enough, through the head of the jazz department at the local Cape Town University. He graduated from UNT in, I believe it was the 70s or the 80s. And so all of his students had like this, mythical, wondrous view of what UNT was. And so there was a conversation had after a jam session with someone who was actually a professor at that university, and was previously one of that guy's students. And he ended up telling me, like, because I'd just been accepted to the University of Cape Town. I was also still applying for universities in America at the time. And he said, man, if you can study jazz where it's born, why in the world would you stay here? And that was a professor telling me not to go to his university. So I kind of took that as a sign. And so I applied. I got accepted through a long series of really miraculous events. There were some circumstances that were barriers that were miraculously overcome. And so there was a very clear metaphorical neon sign. I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to Texas. Never been there before. And I've been here for, 6 years now almost. So that's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Wow. There are worse places to end up.
Oh, 100%. I like it here.
Yeah. Is your family still in South Africa?
So my siblings have also likewise moved out based on like scholarships and where they ended up in life and stuff. So I have an older brother in Georgia, the state, not the country, a sister in California, and my little brother, well, he's actually about to do a semester abroad, but he's also in the States right now.
Right. Right. Okay. And your music, obviously I've only heard Eden at this stage, but
Right.
there is something of South Africa and those rhythms and the timbres of South African music within your composition. So I guess that's, you've got a real melting pot going on.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, even in pieces where like Eden, where I wasn't necessarily consciously thinking let's write South African idioms, definitely comes through. I think for me, the first jazz I heard was South African jazz, just by nature of growing up on that side, and so one of the unifying themes in a lot of, but not all of the subgenres of South African jazz is just strong melody, very singable melody, and for me that's definitely something I've always latched onto. Is if I can't sing it, I don't necessarily want it in there. I'm not a vocalist, so my ability to sing something then is a lot more limited, and it's going to be something that hopefully is catchier and more of an earworm, because I want it to be this big melody, this unifying theme, and so that's definitely there. And something you'll hear in my style in general is you'll have this simple melody, and usually there's a lot going on underneath it, and I think that's also in some way from South African jazz, particularly Cape jazz, where stylistically you've got a lot of these really virtuosic bass lines happening. Someone will just be grooving super hard, and the melody is like a lot of long notes or a very singable, simple melody, but underneath it is just this wonderful, wonderful busyness.
Yes, there's a real, you can't pick it all out at once. You have to listen several times to kind of
Yeah,
get what's going on, which is really nice. I love music that makes you come back for more.
that's a great compliment. Thank you. I think on Eden, one of the things that was really fun about that, with it all coming together, was the programmatic element of it. So
Yeah.
the name Eden, it's inspired by the Judeo-Christian creation narrative, specifically the Adam and Eve and the fall of man. So musically, there's these four characters. There's the voice of God, there's Adam, there's Eve, and there's the serpent. And so they each have their own elements that transform over time. And so it was really fun to write because I wasn't bound to musical form, I was just bound to themes. And so as a writer, I like to stray from genre conventions when it comes to form, unless I'm writing like a period piece or something, in which case, I'll adhere very closely to it. But in this case, why would I do an AABA or an ABAC 32 bar form when this story isn't necessarily cyclical? And so I had the voice of God start, which is presented on the Wurlitzer. It's a series of chords, and it's often by the end of the piece, it's also associated with that timbre of the Wurlitzer. Then Adam's theme enters, very, I guess, kind of cliche on the male voice, and then that theme is passed throughout the piece. And then from then on, we have Eve's theme enter, which is less of a single melody and more of an aesthetic or a groove. And so it's that funkier kind of more driving groove. And then you'll hear Adam and Eve, their themes interact, and then it becomes mellow, the idea of them becoming one flesh, right, in the narrative. And then their themes after that point are overlaid on top of each other. So you have Adam's theme with Eve's groove, and that continues throughout the rest of the piece. The introduction of the serpent comes in slowly, not immediately. There's a change in groove, and it's this very patiently building guitar melody. I thought it was kind of funny to make the make the devil the guitar. It's a little shot at music history, I suppose. But the guitarist who played that role, Mario Wellman, he was perfect. He didn't just go in and shred immediately, even though he had all the capacity to. He stayed true to the narrative and slowly changed the feel and stepped in and encroached on what was happening. And I think it was awesome. Right after that in the piece, you have Jonathan Shire on trumpet playing the role of the decision. And so it's this constantly growing and constantly rising tension that doesn't ever resolve. And when it finally breaks, it's this relaxation, but it also a new type of tension builds. You're going to hear like Adam's theme re-enter, panicked underneath it. And the idea being that it is a resolution, although it's maybe not like narrative-wise a positive resolution, right? I mean, the story being that they chose the wrong thing. And so with that, they still made a choice. And so that's sort of what the dramatic tension is supposed to build is then you have this chaos ensuing as they realize what they've done before the voice of God re-enters with that texture and a darkened or much denser version of the harmony we heard initially. And I would like to thank Wayne Shorter for those voicings. And it's just moving forwards, and it's this idea of being cast out of Eden, and you have the low mallets on the toms sort of representing almost the footsteps as they walk out. So very programmatic throughout, but it was so much fun to write. And the craziest thing about that whole process is that chord progression that starts the whole piece and informs the majority of the piece. I'd been trying to use that in a piece for like 2.5 years. I started writing that chord progression in 2017. I ended up writing this piece at the end of 2019, and I was messing around with non-functional harmony. I had listened to a lot of Debussy at the time, and I realized the chords don't sound anything like Debussy. But I liked his concept of just static harmony, where he's changing chords, but they're not necessarily, if you did like a large scale, like Schenkerian analysis or something, it's not going anywhere, there's not momentum, it's just moving, but still staying in the same place. And so I had a lot of fun with that. I'd like go to the practice room and try and come up with chords that did that. And then I stumbled upon this progression. I was like, okay, this is kind of something special. And so I did. I tried to write a piece for this with those chords for years. I think I have in scratch paper like 12 different pieces that attempted to start with it, and they all would get somewhere. And I'm like, this feels really inorganic and really forced, which kind of defeats the purpose of that natural feeling chord progression anyway. So I just shoved it to the side, and then I guess somewhere along the lines a miniature epiphany happened, and I was like, finally I can use it.
Brilliant. And it's very effective actually, isn't it? So that's good.
Thank you.
So how did the recording process happen? So you finished it at the end of 2019, and as we know, the world changed shortly thereafter. So how did this happen?
So really interestingly, in that 2019 session, so we did record it in 2019. We recorded a live version of it, and we really liked it. And there were some glitches here and there, as you know it is with live versions. You know, you can't have everything perfect. That's kind of the beauty of it. And we decided we were going to release it. And we actually entered the music in a competition through this other label, and we were finalists, and we were going to tour to Shanghai and like perform the music, and that was going to be the premiere. And right when they were deciding who the finalists were, COVID started. So obviously a tour to China was not particularly viable.
No.
And so that never happened, which was a slight bummer. And we figured since we lost that momentum, why not try and start again and, you know, fix things, make things a little bit cleaner. Our audio engineer is actually the bassist on the album. His name is Jake Chafee. He's phenomenal as a musician, as an engineer, as a mixer, as a masterer. And so he was like, hey, if you're willing to wait a little bit longer, I'm busy in the process of upgrading the studio we're working at and stuff like that. So we waited and I ended up writing a couple more pieces than were on the original live session. So those pieces, one of them is coming out as a single, so you'll be hearing that very soon, called Pleiades, and the other one was called A Quiet Night in Pandemonium, both of which very programmatically influenced as well. But it allowed me as a writer to go in different directions to the rest of the album, which is definitely more on the nocturne side of the piece, of the title. But it also allowed him as a engineer to just get better and better and better and better. And so I think as a result, this patience and the waiting through COVID in particular, we weren't able to have everybody in the same room for lockdowns. And this album, even though it's not technically a live album, we had everybody in the same room. We didn't put up drum shields. We wanted the bleed. So I realized maybe that's an abnormal approach, but we wanted to keep that intensity of the live nature of it to sound like it's a live gig, even though it's studio with the ability to clean some things up. But we weren't able to do that until restrictions were dropped. And so as a result, I had more music, he had better equipment, and just kept honing his skills. And we were finally able to all record in the same room again. And so ended up only recording the album that you have now in 2021 in May and June. So it's like almost a 2-year gap between when the music was written, when some of the music was written. The other advantage of that is we played a lot of the music a lot. And so like slipping in was kind of like, wrapping up in a blanket that's, very familiar and comfortable to you. You don't have to think about it, it just feels good, and everybody's all warm and snuggly in it. It was great because a lot of us had, moved to different cities and stuff by this point, and so it was a big family reunion in a way, because a lot of these people, like the drummer, I've been playing with him since he was the first drummer I ever played with in America. And so we've been playing together for 6 years now, and it's great because, and the bassist is a similar way. I've been playing with him consistently for about 3.5, 4 years. He's been my first call bassist for everything, every genre imaginable. And so, and those two have also been playing together consistently. So we have this crazy rhythm section lockup that's been amazing. And so I can look at them, and I feel like if you were to chart the graph of like a musical friendship at the beginning, like you don't necessarily know how to talk to the person in their terms, so you're like, I don't know, do that thing, and then you get to comfortable and you have like all this crazy vocabulary, and then after that I feel like it drops back down again, and you're so comfortable that you can just say do the thing, and they do the thing. And that's kind of where we were at. It's like we'd be playing and I was like, hey Jake, can you do the thing? And he's like, oh yeah, this, like adjust his pedal board and like, change his timbre entirely on the bass for 5 seconds. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to play with these people that are super comfortable with your music, and that you feel confident in bringing weird stuff to. My music, I feel like, is not normal for any one genre. It takes a lot of stuff. I mean, I started life as a classical violinist, so I have some of that influence in there, and I have the South African stuff, and then like on the jazz side of things, I'm super influenced by Maria Schneider and Bob Brookmeyer, but also Wayne Shorter's voicing style, and also Joshua Redman's counterpoint. And then like one of my favorite bands is Hiatus Coyote, which is this crazy
right,
awesome.
they're great, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like all of that sort of blends in there in this weird way. And then I somehow along the line developed a metric concept where to me 7 feels way more natural, and if I'm than like a lot of 4/4, and feels more authentic. And so my band is playing in a lot of time signatures that are changing, not because necessarily I'm like, ha, this is math rock, but because I've got to the point where when I sing melodies and transcribe them down the line, it's like, oh, smokes, that was in 7 the whole time, or that was like swapping between 5 and 6 just naturally. And so they've gotten used to my wildness, and so being able to rely on a band that is not only able to do that stuff, but is expecting it, and when they get the call, they're like, okay, so it's probably going to be some of those shenanigans. They're just like mentally prepared, and that's pretty nice. And I'd say on the flip side, playing with the same people for a long time, I remember like when I was younger, taking like the jazz history classes and stuff, and like those overviews of history, and they're like, well, this person wrote for specific band members, thinking, oh, that's cool, that's nice, and moving on. But having specific people in your band, like just to go back to the same names, like Jake has influenced how I write bass lines. I know what he does. I know it fits his style perfectly. Josh has influenced entirely how I conceive elements of color painting for drums. The pianist in the album, Holly, she's a force of nature. She sounds like Bill Evans and Stravinsky had a musical child, and it's the weirdest combination of things, and I love it. Like, there's nobody who voices like her. There's nobody who hears like the build of melodicism like she does, and she has a very unique approach. But as a result, it's like I have that player's vocabulary in my arsenal. Of course, I've got to capitalize on that because nobody else can do that. And
Right.
so it's been really cool having the ability to have those people influence how I write. The trumpeter Jonathan Shire as well. We always joked that the man is like part machine. Like he can sight read anything. And so like if there's ever a doubt, like in a 4-part contrapuntal texture, if one of them is like super hard, it's like, okay, well, I don't want to play that, but Jonathan can do that in 2 seconds. You know,
Yeah.
So it's got to the point where I've been able to rely on these musicians so much that if I'm writing something, no matter how hard it is, it's not a question of, well, can they do this? It's like, okay, we can do it. We're going to have to practice, but it's not ever going to be too difficult, which is just this wonderful feeling that I know the band can and will do it.
Yeah. Fantastic. So is it going to be going live? Is it going to go out on the road?
Yeah, that's the hope. That's the hope. We are a little bit scattered and diasporic right now. The band's scattered across a few different states. But that is the game plan. So with the release of the album, we've got, I guess, context. I've been working for a record label outside in music for a while, so I've developed a lot of skills through them, and we'll be releasing through their imprint Next Level. So just plug there. They're awesome. I love the label.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about them is that they're very ethical. So like they don't keep your masters, which is great.
Brilliant.
But with that, I've learned a lot of skills on the marketing side. So building this album, it's also the building of a press kit and building of stuff to, you know, start taking, hey, let's do a circuit of the Dallas-Fort Worth scene, and here's all our information, here's our press kit, here's this and that, and so that hopefully when the time comes, we can get a nice, you know, 2-week circuit and be taking this music out there. As to how far on the road we'll go, you know, I would love to take it back to South Africa, but I mean that's going to be a lot more logistics and fundraising to be able to take a band of at our biggest, our band of 12 people. That's not a cheap tour.
No, absolutely no. Fantastic.
I would love to.
Yeah. Well, I'll watch this space. So
okay,
great stuff.
Well, I'll keep you updated.
Excellent. Yeah, please do. Right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. That was really interesting.
Well, I'm so glad to have been on the show. Like I said, it's been cool to finally come full circle in a way, because I've heard a lot of the stuff you've interviewed with the artists, and I've really loved what you've done. So I was like really excited, and you're like, hey, come talk on the show. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really nice actually. There are several people that, you know, I've got this ongoing relationship with, which is really nice, because it's I don't think this would have happened without lockdown, because actually people would have been busy touring, and you know they wouldn't have time for little podcasts like me. And now I interviewed Maria Schneider. You know, she's one of the biggest artists in the world.
Yes,
so you know, that's brilliant.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's so awesome.
So thank you ever so much for your time, Simeon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you again for being here. And I'm excited to share the rest of this music with you as it comes out.
Yeah, please do. Make sure I'm on the list.
Oh, you are on the list. Don't you worry about that.
Great stuff. Okay, thanks, Simeon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Simeon Davis. And as he said, his new album is out in about a month's time. So do follow the links in the show notes to find out more. Thank you once again for joining me for Harmonious World, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this and to maybe some of my past shows. I've got some great ones in the archive. I mentioned that one with Maria Schneider. She's seriously one of the biggest music artists in the world, and she appeared on my little podcast. So do feel free to go back and check out. They're all in the archive. They're all there. Please carry on sharing the things that you're good at. Let's try and make this a more harmonious world. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.